welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about the solution-focused school and opportunities to give students a voice in their future. How many of you are already working in schools? If you could just maybe put a little thumbs up or something, or you can just indicate it on, I can just see you in your pictures. How many of you are already working in schools? Okay, awesome. And what have you done? Maybe you could put this in the chat at times. What have you done over the past year or so, even though we've been in a really crazy time, that gave students a voice? What might you have done? Just a few words. Just put it in the chat for a second. Give them a voice. What might you have done, even just on a small scale, to give students a voice? Just a few words. Solution-focused scaling questions. Awesome. Great. Yeah. Was lucky enough to be one of the students given a voice, trained in this. Oh, wonderful. Great. Great. What else have you all done to give students a voice? Because they have a lot to tell us. That is for sure. And I'll wait another minute or so. Okay, Kathy said, I asked what might be helpful given the situation. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, Carol Rogers, best helps identify. Yes. Shannon asked how useful an art session was. Ah, nice, nice. And you know, they tell us things, maybe, I don't know if you found this out, Shannon, but they'll tell us things that we never would have dreamed made the difference. It's so amazing what they tell us. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And just a very brief overview of what I do. I started out my career in 1974 as a middle school teacher here in the United States, in Texas. I taught earth science and art, and after I started having our three children, I went back to school in the evening. My husband got to take care of three children, and I got a master's degree in school counseling and went on and became a school counselor and worked in all grades in the US from kindergarten through 12th grade. It's like there's one more item here, two more. Caitlin said, asking them what they want to learn and what they hope from it. Yes. Ask what they would hope to walk away with after our time together. Wonderful. These are things that really push our students to give us ideas. And because they are our ideas, their ideas, more likely that they'll follow through. So great. I'll share a story with you all that changed my approach with students. This was a long time ago when I was first starting to use a solution-focused approach. I was very, very pleased with it. But I didn't realize how systemic I needed to be. And listening to Eve Lipchick today in the opening plenary, I was so glad to hear her say, keep it systemic, because when you come to looking at a school, it is such a system. It is a family in itself. So this particular young 13-year-old was brought to therapy to see me, and his mom came and his dad came. Parents were divorced. Mom was a teacher. She was concerned because their son was suddenly going from an honor student to a student who was getting in trouble with the law, and he had recently been expelled from school because he brought marijuana to school. Mom said it was more than that. He had gone from a respectful young man prior to the divorce to now a very destructive young man. He would often tear up the house and knock down walls. And when that would happen, Mom would send him off to Dad's house, where Dad would keep him out isolated. And so the young man really never seemed to improve. And so they decided to bring him to counseling. So watching the young man in my office, I noticed that he stared at his feet more than anything. And I started off with what are your best hopes and what do you hope we accomplish here? And he just kind of shook his head. And Mom said, we want him to behave. We want him to be respectful. Dad said, yeah, we need him to stop doing all these things that are so destructive because we've tried everything. So, okay, really, what have you tried? Well, we've tried punishing. We've tried locking him up in his room and letting him not see his friends and not play his music and all kinds of things. And I was noticing that as they said all these things too, that the young man continued to look at the floor, not look up, not engage at all. And after a while, I saw that Mom and Dad were just trying really a pretty tough love approach. And I asked if it would be okay if just for a minute I spoke with their son by myself. And they said, okay. And they walked out and sat in the lobby for a little bit. And I talked to the young man. I said, I noticed when your parents were talking about all the things they've been trying to get you back on track, that not much really seemed to work. And he said, nope. He said, they just don't understand. And I said, what is it that they don't understand? And he said, I'm really a good kid, Linda. I really am. But the way things are right now, they push me here and send me to my dad's, and he doesn't like me. My mom doesn't like me. She yells at me and then tells my grandparents to come get me, and they yell at me. And what's the point anyway? I said, gosh, it doesn't seem like they see this good kid in you. If what would you imagine you might need to begin to do so that your parents could see this good kid inside of you? And slowly he began to give me all kinds of ideas that he would need to begin to do to show them the kid he was inside. And I started making a list and said, thanked him so much for the list. And I said, in return, what could your parents begin to do to help you stay, on track being this good kid? And he said, just anything but what they're doing, anything. He said, I don't think they care for me at all. So I left the room and went to get his parents and asked his parents to come back. And in the hallway, before I ever went back into the therapy room, and I said, you guys are really trying so hard to help your son get back on track. Would you say what you've done so far has worked? And they said, well, no, that's why we're here. Okay. Well, would you be willing to do something a little different as we enter the room? And they said, well, at this point, we'll try anything. So they came back in, and I sat down next to their son and I said, I want to reintroduce John to you. Reintroduce is a word that I've come up with over the years because when kids in schools get reputations, and John had a reputation, everybody sees only the reputation. They don't see the kid. And I learned to use a word called reintroduction because it gives people, kind of pushes them into maybe seeing a student differently. So I said to Mom and Dad, I want to reintroduce John to you. And he's got an idea about how you can begin to see what he calls the good kid inside of him. And at this point, this young man who's sitting next to me just starts sobbing. And Mom and Dad are just so surprised. And I just kind of let him sit there for a second. And I talked a little bit about what he told me that he was going to be trying to do to show them over the next week or so that he really was a good kid. And I asked the parents, in return, all I want you to do is to watch. Watch out for things that tells you he really is a good kid. And they left after that. And I saw them over the summer. It was during that summer time of year. And as I saw them 2 more times in the summer, and John had improved dramatically. Mom started watching him and complimenting him and doing things with him. Together, they patched up the walls in the house. Dad and he started doing things more together. When on the weekends when he would visit, things were going very well. And then school started. And John was ready to go back and not only show his parents that he was a good kid, he was ready to go back and show the administrators at the school and his teachers that he was a good kid. He walked into school the first morning of school in the fall semester, and he was met by the administrator who had expelled him. The administrator looked at him and said, why did you even bother to come back? John turned around, walked out of the school, and walked home 5 miles. His mom called me and said, Linda, the school just called and said he left. I don't know where he is. And I learned and I realized at that point that what I forgot to do was to let the school know who John was going to be when he walked into their building that day. And I will never forget that day. Mom eventually was able to get in touch with John, and she decided to put him in a different school. Before we did that, she made sure that she and I talked to the principal of the new school and his future teachers and let them know that he was really a good kid, and just to watch out for those things that he did well. And he continued to do well at a different school. From that point on, I became a school counselor who always, no matter what happened in my office, when a student told me things that they had wished for, I always made it something that I would do to get their permission. Can I please share with your teachers that you're going to be trying something new that might make a difference for you? Would it be okay if I did that? When I worked in the elementary schools and middle schools, I would often walk kids back to class and knock on the doors of the classrooms and ask the teacher to step out just for a few minutes and say to the teachers, number one, thank you for sending John to me. He and I've had a conversation, he's going to try out some new things in your class just for today. Would you just watch and see what he does that you notice is different? When I was younger, I would say, and let him know you saw it. I learned over the years, though, that teachers are too busy. So don't give them one more thing to do. Just ask them to watch. And I think just the action of saying, just watch, it made them look at John with new eyes. Then he had a chance. So this is something I'm going to be sharing with you today. The importance of always sharing what's going on with the student, with their permission, of course, and then watch what happens. The power of giving students a voice. Students feel heard. A lot of times in education, we do our best to come up with great interventions, great curriculum changes, great ways of consequencing and rewarding kids, but we never really ask them what it is that could make a difference. I remember one student we had that was misbehaving a lot at our campus, and teachers tried everything, all kinds of rewards and compliments, and one day a very exasperated teacher walked up to the young man on the playground. He was, I think, a 10-year-old, and said, you know, we have tried everything we know to try to get you to do things better, and we're at a loss. Can you tell us what we might do that would get you motivated to make some changes? And he looked at her and he said, yeah, I can tell you something. He said, one thing that I would really, really like and appreciate is if I have a good day, tell my dad. You see, he thinks I'm worthless. He doesn't think I'll ever amount to anything. He tells me that almost every day. And if you could maybe tell him once in a while that I'm doing okay, that would be awesome. And the teacher said, great, let's think of some things you could begin to do well. And that began to give us all an idea as to how to work with him. If we hadn't asked, we wouldn't have known. Kids have ideas. We need to ask their opinion and get their ideas on how we could help them best. Students become more motivated when we give them a voice, and they feel competent and see themselves as collaborative experts on their own lives. I'll share with you a little bit how I work with when in my practice. I would always go after my first session was in my private practice with a young person who had a school issue. I would meet with them the first time in my office, and the second time was always on their home campus. And I was meeting with all of their teachers and the student and the parent and the principal in a meeting. It was a very solution focused meeting, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. But it was amazing to watch their faces when they were in a room with maybe 10 different people whom before might have been on their case all the time, giving them a hard time, who suddenly were looking at them a little differently. And it was almost like magic. The relationship changed between students and student and teachers. And when that happens, we know from systems theory, a little change is going to cause a big change, and it usually did. The student is seen differently by teachers this way. It stops negative reactions. Here's the thing, if you work in a school and you are maybe referred a young person to talk to as a counselor or social worker, and you do a great job, you have a great conversation with the student, and then you send them back to class, what usually happens? Has anybody ever noticed what happens if you do your great work and then you send kids back to class to the same teacher who was upset with them? You can put it in the chat box if you like. What usually happens when you've done a great job and you send them back? The same thing. Yeah, because it's a system that in the classroom that often creates the issues. Maybe a teacher's not giving kids some attention or time, something's going on. By stopping and sharing with a teacher, I've talked to John, and he's got ideas he wants to try out to show you the kind of student you could be. Would you just watch? First of all, teacher doesn't have to do anything new. And the second thing I want to encourage you to do when you ask a teacher to do that is thank them for sending you John, a student like John. And I also learned something else when I was a school counselor in high school here in the US. Always tell the teachers that you work for them as much as you work for the students, because you do. And I like to tell them too that I work for you and I want you to have the class that you really want to have, where you can be the teacher you want to be. Would it be okay if I asked you to just watch today for something that John might do different that tells you things are going better? That seems to get me buy-in, and buy-in is everything. After I learned how to talk to kids and make sure that I didn't send them back to teachers who didn't know what was going on, I met a young man named Tyler, age 16, was truant from school. And as I read this, I want you to watch for something, watch for some exceptions, and you can put that in the chat. His parents were divorced and his mom was suspected of drug abuse. Tyler lived with his grandparents because he and dad did not get along. He was attending one class out of 4 and was making a high grade in that class. At lunch, he would sit in his truck and drink. He wanted to drop out of school and work. He had little motivation to stay in school. What stands out to you? What are you curious about? If you put on your solution focused hats for a second, what are you curious about? I see something already. Yes, Carol, awesome. What else would you be curious about in this scenario I just gave you? He takes care of his truck. Okay, good. What class did he attend and what motivated him? Yes, yes, yes. Relationship with that one teacher. Yeah. What was it about that class? Actually, that class, he was making a high A in that class. Yeah. Anne Marie did beat you to it. Yeah. What was it about that class? Your problem focused counselor would be thinking, oh, well, you've got 3 classes, you got to get back together. You got to get them on track. Solution focused counselor is more intrigued with the one class. What is going on in that class? So one day he came to school and I was there at school. I was his counselor and the administrator called me and she said, come back, come quick, he's here. We don't want to miss a chance to talk to him because he's been truant again. And his dad was in the office and I walked in and I saw Tyler. Tyler was sitting there really upset because he really wanted to leave. He came for that one class and he was going to leave. But the administrator said, nope, you can't leave. He was 16, so in Texas, he could not drop out of school on his own. He looked at his dad and said, just let me drop out. I've got a job, I can make money, support myself. And dad said, nope, there's no way you're going to be dropping out of school. So I looked at him and I looked at all the people in the room who were just telling him what to do. And I thought to myself, what on earth, how does he get through all this? It was like he needed a miracle, right? So I asked him, suppose tonight, actually, before I did this, I took him down in my office away from all this. And I sat and I talked to him and said, suppose tonight while you slept, a miracle happened. When you wake up tomorrow, you think, hey, I don't mind going to school today. What would be going on at school or different in any way that would help you to think that way? And I'll never forget him. He looked up at me right away and he pointed his finger at me like this. And he said, I'll tell you what it would be. I'd be in class with kids my own age. Right now he was behind, so he was with younger kids. I would have friends. He said, I have no friends here because I guess I'm not at school that much. I would feel like I belonged somewhere. Teachers would acknowledge that I was there. He said, most of them don't care that I'm even in the room when I do come. School would be a place where people were glad to see me. There would be more teachers like Miss Jackson. And I said, yeah, tell me about Miss Jackson. What class is that? And he said, it's psychology class. He said, in classes like psychology, I'm interested because it applies to me. My dad takes me to all these doctors because he thinks something's wrong with me. There's really nothing wrong with me. I'm just tired of not fitting in and not being able to have a voice in anything I do. So, okay, tell you what, I'm going to give you a voice. We've got to, since you've got 3 classes that you didn't quite do well in this semester, but one you did awesome in, we're going to create a new schedule for you for the spring. And going by these ideas from him, I created him a schedule and chose teachers that I knew would be a lot like Miss Jackson, who would be very interested in him. And I also gave him a position in our counseling office where he could be a helper. I thought maybe if he were around other kids who were his own age, he might get along with them. And we also had a secretary who was like like a grandmother to a lot of our kids. And I introduced him to her after we finished. And I said, okay, since we've got a new schedule here and school's about ready to be let out for the winter break, it was the end of the semester. I said, when you come back in January, do not go to your classes. Come see me first because I want us to meet with your new teachers just for 10 minutes. That's it. And he looked at me really strange, but he decided that he would try that out. January, he comes back, shows up first thing on my doorstep. And I said, great, glad you're here. We walked next door to our conference room where 4 of his teachers were sitting. And like I mentioned earlier, I said, I want to introduce to you Tyler. Tyler's got some ideas on how he's going to make school work this semester. I appreciate all of you for greeting him whenever he comes in, because I'd already shared with them what he told me would make a difference for him. And they did what I thought they would do. They all walked up to him and shook his hand and said, can't wait to see you today. And off he went. It was important though, because Tyler again had a reputation at school for being a kid that no point in trying to reach him. It's not going to work. That afternoon and the weeks that followed, Tyler came to school, stayed in school. He stayed in school an entire semester. At the end of the semester, he had done very well in classes because he was bright. And the teachers would brag on him, how well he did, how polite he was. At that point, though, he was still behind in credits and needed more to graduate. And he was approaching age 17. And so he asked me if he could apply for our accelerated program, which is a place where in the school district where he could go in a self-paced approach, make up the credits he was missing to graduate. And so since he was attending school, he was eligible and he went off in the fall. That fall led into spring, and by the springtime, he was ready to graduate from high school. And I went to his graduation because, how could you not go to something like that? It was just amazing young man who'd made huge, huge strides. And when he graduated, I went up to congratulate him. And by then I was talking about him to people like you. And I said, you've done such amazing work. And I said, if you had a message to give to people who work with kids, teachers, administrators, what would that message be? And this is what he told me. He said, tell them to care that the kids in their classroom, some kids never get anybody to care. Tell them to build relationships with their students. This is the biggest one of all. Let them know how much they mean to students, even when the students don't show them. And that's just priceless here. At that point, he gave me these ideas and he said, oh yeah, Dr. Metcalfe, I've decided to go to college. Would you mind being a reference? Yes, I'll be a reference. And fill the reference sheet out that he brought me the next week. And the last time I heard from Tyler, he had finished his undergraduate work and he was off at a master's degree program in Lubbock, Texas, working on a degree in counseling. You never know how much giving kids a voice to tell you what makes a difference can guide you in getting them on a direction that is the direction that works for them. And it's a process though, and it might take a little time. So I'm going to show you a video of a video I did with a student of mine who's also a mom, and she knows I was going to show this to you. She has a son who's just not quite doing what he needed to do in school, and so she asked me to talk to her. This is a very short little video, but you'll see what we do with it. Hopefully it'll be helpful. Well, hello, Ms. Jones. Thank you for meeting with me today about your son, and I really appreciate your accepting my invitation just to talk with you a little this morning. I'm really interested in knowing maybe what your best hopes are for your son. I mean, I know he's gone through some challenges right now with 2 of his teachers, but I'm interested in what your hopes are, and I'll share with you why in a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Thank you for setting this up with me. I guess my hopes would be that he actually would be able to get along in those 2 classes, right? Be able to not have those sarcastic remarks that he's doing. I don't understand why he, is good in 3 classes, but then in 2 of them he has trouble. So my best hopes would be that he can behave in those 2 classes as well.
Yeah, what difference do you think it'll make for him someday soon when he does behave in those 2 classes? I mean, as far as who he is, what difference do you think? And even at home, what difference would it make for him?
Oh goodness, at home, I could tell you right now, it would be a lot less chaotic and stressful for him. When we talk about those classes, obviously, I have to get on to him and I was really trying to stress to him what we need to do. So man, arguments, temper tantrums and things would go down at home. As far as the difference for him, like at school, I think he would just feel more accepted and he would be happier to go to school again.
Yeah, that feeling of accepted. What does that do for him, you think, in school to feel accepted? What would that do for him in the future when he felt accepted in a class?
To feel accepted, let me think for a minute. I think if he felt accepted, he would he would act differently. He
Mhm.
would, he would sit still. He wouldn't be so snarky.
Yeah.
Um, and in the future, I think it would just help him to keep friends.
Oh, yeah.
Keep those friends.
Well, like you mentioned earlier, two of his teachers, I know he's got three other teachers. When we think about him being accepted in the future and then things going better at home as a result and all of that, can you tell me times when he does maybe have that feeling of acceptance that maybe helps him? Like, I'm really kind of curious about those other three classes and what those teachers are doing in those classes. I mean, do you have any ideas as to what's different in those classes that maybe your son says?
Excuse me. He said that the teachers seemed to be a little bit more patient with him,
Oh,
and they talked to him like a person instead of as a trouble kid. They actually listened to him.
oh my gosh. And if he were in here, what would he say they do that makes him know they are really listening to him? Like, how do they listen to him? If we peeked in those classes, what do you think we might see?
Um, when they're really listening to him, like he tends to talk, sometimes out of turn, but they actually get down to his level.
Oh,
And when they ask him questions, they don't just interrupt him, they let him speak. They let him say his sentences. So we would see them letting him say his thoughts, and they actually respond back to what he said instead of, okay, whatever, and dismissing it. They actually
oh,
respond. Does that make sense? They respond back to him. So he
yeah,
knows, hey, they heard me.
yeah. In addition to those three classes, can you tell me other times, maybe even in other areas of his life where you call it snarky, where that snarky doesn't appear, and instead this young man who you know and love and see as competent is shows that side? Can you tell me other situations outside of school where he's not
Yeah,
that snarky
not that
person?
snarky.
Yeah, yeah.
So, normally during the week, whenever we've had a good week, we have breakfast and we chit chat. And when I ask him about school, he actually answers me instead of, whatever, or, it's time to do your homework. I don't want to do my homework.
Oh
Um,
wow.
he
Yeah.
just, he does it. And we actually have a conversation about school, about everything. And he doesn't give me those, I don't know, or why are we doing this? Or I don't want to do homework. He just kind of very smooth, and he's that person. He's not that snarky little kiddo.
Yeah, yeah. So in the three classes where he does well, the teachers really get on his level. They don't dismiss him. Would that be something like you talked about earlier? Would that be maybe more along the lines of the acceptance thing you were talking about?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'd like to do, with your permission, is I'd like to arrange a team meeting for your son, and with all of his teachers, all five teachers. And I'd like to take the information you've just given me, which is the times particularly when he does well, and what the teachers are doing specifically, and invite you and your son too, to a meeting next week, if possible. And it's just an invitation to you, an invitation to him, and I'll be talking to him too before we go in about what you said. Is that okay if I do that?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
get him to verify, yes, this is true, mom's right, and maybe get some other things from him that the teachers do in those three classes. And then I might ask him what his best hopes are for his time, for the rest of the school year, because school year's almost over, and I know he's got all A's in spite of all this, as you say, this snarkiness that creeps in. Sometimes he certainly is able to stand up to it and make sure that it doesn't take him over in the other three classes. So that's my plan. And my thinking is, if by doing that, it'll prepare us for next year. And maybe whatever teachers that I choose, I can also share that information with them, so he's not going to start over. So would that be okay if we did something like that?
Yes, definitely. I would love to have something like that. Anything to make school easier for him on the social side of it.
Yeah. Okay. Before I go further, any comments or questions about this? It's like I see a couple of things. Will said, how it's funny how when we treat young people as experts and ask them what is important, they will light the way for you. Oh, they sure will. They sure will. They'll give you that will, and they'll give you even more. Any comments? We're kind of a small group here, so if you want to just talk out and give me some feedback on what you just saw and what you think we might have done that was helpful, or you can put it in the chat if you like. Okay. Okay. Just giving them a voice is important. So important. It really is. And often they're the very last ones we ask. Okay. Love how hope started to show up for mom. Oh, it really was. Love, Will said, love how SF doesn't judge people. So when we use SF, we are respecting them. It does create that respect. And love you asking mom about her best hopes for her son. Always, always. So let me share with you the process that I always take when I do things like this. And this is real typical of what I do. First thing I do is call the school and talk to someone such as a school counselor, social worker. And if there's not someone there like that, I might talk to an administrator and share my position. I usually got permission from the parent to call the school and talk to them very briefly. And I just share with them that I'd like to come to school and meet for like 20, 30 minutes. That's all the time I need. And meet with the team of teachers that work with uh, this mom's son. We'll call him Harry. And usually it's kind of a different thing for a therapist to go to a school, so I usually have to answer questions, etc., and get ID checked and all that kind of thing. But then I send them an email with this is something I call exception observations. I've learned over the years from working with teachers, a lot of teachers at second in all grades, that they're typically tend to be problem focused because that's the way they were taught as teachers. Teachers are, I was a teacher until I'm a teacher. We were taught look for problems and fix them. That's what teachers tend to do. And so they try to create curriculum that works and interventions that work and all that. So in an effort to make sure we get on a solution focused path, I send this to them. Dear teacher, there will be a solution focused conversation for Harry on Friday in room 101 at 8 o'clock. You are an important member of the student's academic life. The meeting will not last longer than 30 minutes. Prior to the meeting, please notice times when this student is slightly successful in your classroom. And I have to admit, sometimes I will highlight slightly successful in a classroom. List motivational strategies, other methods that help the student to be slightly more successful. These are called exceptions. Please list at least 5 exceptions below and bring the list to the meeting. And so that kind of gets them in a frame of mind a little bit differently than just thinking about what's going wrong with Harry. And this is basically how the meeting goes. I've narrowed the solution focused approach down because I teach a lot of teachers and school counselors to 3 steps. 3 steps is easier. 3 steps, best hopes. When everyone is in the room, it'd be typical of me to have 4 or 5 teachers, an administrator, like a headmaster or principal, the mom, dad, grandparent, and the student. The student usually sits next to me, not out of choice. I just say, don't feel like you have to say a whole lot because they've already told me things, right? And so we start off with what are your best hopes? What are all of your best hopes for our time? And everybody gets to answer. And I like asking the student first, what are your best hopes? Sometimes they're like, I have to admit, sometimes they're a little bit shocked because they're in the room with all these adults. So they'll look at me like, I don't know. Okay, can I share with them what you told me? Okay, you have to be accepted. Maybe that's what would be what Harry wanted to be, feel accepted in class and do better in class. And then I ask the teachers, what are your best hopes for Harry? So we start off from the very beginning. We don't talk about the problem. We don't talk about what's bringing Harry. If people insist, we will listen, but then I will not answer or respond to any of the problematic thinking. And I'll just say, so what are your best hopes for him instead of what is concerning you? How do you want things to be? And then they begin to tell me, and I start writing it all down. And when we finally get to something that is beginning to look like kind of a collaboration of ideas that are pretty similar, I might say, okay, these are the things you all told me. What shall we start with today? And then if somebody says, well, let's talk about him feeling accepted. Okay, we'll do that. Number two, preferred future. So imagine that things begin to get better as you all describe. And Harry, they get better for you too, and you begin to feel accepted just for the rest of this week. I'm going to go slow. We know from the solution focused approach, you go slow to get change to happen quicker. It's kind of strange how it happens. But going slow because I want it to be achievable. And for a very young student, I might even just say for the rest of the day or just for one day. For a student of Harry's age, which was around 13, just for this week. That's all, just for this week. What might begin happening that would tell each of you things were going better? What would he begin doing that would tell you he is acceptable? And let the teachers begin to tell Harry, well, you'd be doing this. Some teachers may say, well, you wouldn't be throwing things across the room. I'm going to stop and say, okay, so instead of that, what would he do? Always trying to get into what he would be doing rather than what he's not doing. And then ask the student. Sometimes after they've heard things, they'll begin to say, I'd ask them, what will you begin to do just during the next week so that they notice the kind of kid you are and you begin to feel accepted. What do you think? And it's really amazing to see how kids will start saying, well, I need to do my work, or I probably need to, raise my hand before I talk out loud or something like that. They pretty much know what they need to be doing. All we had to do is ask them. And what's really fun about this is that when they're telling me these things, the teachers are hearing it. They might have thought this kid has no clue. He really has not, he doesn't want to do better in school. And something else happens too in these meetings that is real exciting for me. And that is in general, I may have 5 or 6 teachers in a room, in a team meeting like this. And I might ask them too, the next question, tell me times when you've seen this part of Harry. And there's always going to be 1 or 2 or 3 teachers, or maybe more, who say, I never had an issue with him. And it's really interesting to watch the teachers in the room who have issues with him. And they almost begin to look at their colleague like, what are you doing, that is making a difference? And so I just asked that question, my gosh, are you serious? What are you doing that we can all learn from? And I write those down because those are exceptions. And then I ask everybody there, look at the page I sent you. What else have you noticed about him in the past few days before this meeting that you saw as okay, as acceptable, that it was slightly better? And then they start reading those things. Now, granted, sometimes teachers will bring things that are still problem focused, like, well, he didn't talk back to me yesterday when we were in a group. Okay, so what did he do instead of that? Well, he was quiet and calm. Oh, and how was that helpful to you, Miss Smith? Really important to ask a teacher that in front of the student, because student gets to hear, oh, so when I was respectful, it was better for her. I said, and I'd love to say to her, so when it was better for you too, how did that affect your day, Miss Smith? When he did those things and he was respectful, that gives the teacher a chance to show her humanness. And I think that's so important for teachers to do that. Kids often see teachers as superhuman. It's kind of like when you see us at the grocery store, it's like, oh my gosh, they eat. They go to the grocery store. So giving kids a chance to see that. And then also what's happening at the same time is the students hearing things from these teachers that maybe he never thought they noticed about him. The relationship changes during meetings like this. And we ask the student too, tell me times when some of these actions have happened on a small scale where you felt a little accepted. What classes, what has happened in those classes that made you feel a little bit accepted? It could be as simple as a teacher walked over and instead of calling on me said, do you have a question about something we've just done? It could be something as simple as that. Or a teacher would stop me in the hallway and ask me about the basketball game that I'm playing in that night. Those types of things are small things, but because they're coming from a student, there's a better chance they're going to make a difference. And I'm making a list while I'm in this meeting with everybody. And at the end of the meeting, I let them know that I'm going to make copies of the list. And I go make copies and come back and hand out all the copies to all the teachers and say, these are the things that looks like we're going to be trying out. Would you mind just trying this out just for a week? And then I like looking at the student at the last part and saying, what do you think you could begin to do or think about so that they begin to see this side of you that maybe they haven't seen as much of yet? And it gives the student a chance to, most of them will say something like, I just need to watch what I'm doing in class. Occasionally you have somebody who doesn't know what to say, but you know they're thinking about it. Either way, the system changes when a meeting like this happens. And as a solution focused therapist in private practice, and when I was specializing in seeing students like this, I love going to schools and doing these meetings and things like this. Usually after that meeting, I might see the student and family one more time in my office, and then I don't see them anymore because the system takes over. Because the system changed, the context changes, and so do the people involved in the system. Any questions? I'll stop for a second and see if you all have any questions. Feel free to either put it in the chat or just speak out loud. It's okay. See if anybody has any questions about this process. Or what do you think? You can put it in the chat box. What do you think about this process, this possible process of going and sitting in a room with a student and teachers and parent and administrators and just talking about what would make a difference? Oh, well, thank you, Simona. Yes, it is. I've done it with kindergartners. I've done it for 11th grade students in the US and do a lot of it for middle school kids. That is such an interesting time of life. Will says, sorry, I'm not contributing. It's 23. Oh, goodness. It's okay. Will, I hope you get some rest soon. Um, and says, really like it. Denmark, we more often use the signs of safety, yes, as a format for meeting in schools. Yeah. Alifa gracefully brings everyone together. It really does. And I think it's always been the biggest discovery for me is how kids begin to see their teachers. And it makes all the difference. And how teachers put on a new set of classes, you might say, when they see the kids the next time. Ms. Potta says, we do this at our school and everyone participating makes everyone feel involved and like they have a voice. Yes, yes. Yes, Ms. Pottas, you live in a marvelous place where I know Merritt Watson works. And do you work at her school? I'm curious. Do you work with Merritt Watson or Jackie? Yes, yeah, yeah, it is. Okay.
Sorry, yes, yeah, that's where I work. Grade 7 teacher at School of Merit.
Yes, yes, yes. Wonderful. Yes, it is makes a huge difference when you involve kids in the conversation. It really does. Evelyn says, I think it would be an important part. Have you experienced a student or family being withdrawn? You know, um, I'm careful, Evelyn. If I think that teachers are going to be very irate or upset with a student, I meet with them first and I don't let the student in the room until I have met with the teachers and listened to them because they need to be heard too. They become my clients as well. Once I've gotten them and heard from them about the things that they're maybe concerned about, and that's when I might see kids withdrawn a little bit. And let them know that we're going to have a different kind of meeting because again, I want them to have the classrooms that they want. Usually they're going to buy into it then, and then we go on and it works out a little bit better. So I hope that answers your questions a little bit. If I get them on track and I begin to lead the meeting a little bit, if my student and parent are a little bit standoffish or a little bit isolated, I will continue to do that. By the time the meeting is over, that's when you usually see the parent brighten up and the kid brighten up. Let's see. Simona, is it possible to receive your presentation? Sure, sure. I will put my email in here. This is my email. If you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, just feel free to, I can't send you the video, of course, but I could certainly send you the PowerPoint. So, okay. So to kind of finish this up here, When students participate and have a voice in a meeting, the student's view of his teachers changes as well, and that's just huge. They often become advocates for the teachers, and the teachers are so surprised. Um, it contributes to new responses to the teachers by the student. And giving students a voice means we receive a direction that is meaningful. I want to show you a very short little video of a very cute teenage girl who's going back to school in a couple of weeks. I asked her a couple of questions just in preparing for this. And again, nothing like a student telling us what it would be. At this point, I'm just asking her to tell me what could be going on the first few days of school that would make a difference for you. And her best hopes were that she would have a plan and be accepted by the teachers, or teachers would see her as a good student. She's a top senior. Okay, so here she is.
Well, most of my friends are. We don't like to disrupt class and things like that. And some teachers just think that a class is going to be disruptive, which, you know, happens a lot in high school. But I would just hope that they kind of come at this thinking that we also want the class to succeed just as much as they do.
That was just priceless to me when she said, I wish they knew that we want the class to succeed as much as they do. I mean, I don't think a teacher would have ever thought about that. Yeah. Wow. No. Oh, gosh, I wish I knew that. I wish I could tell them all that, but you all want it to be successful as much as they do. And I wonder what they would, and this is a really weird question, I know, but I wonder what they would say you could do on that first day or two that would tell them you're really not trying to be disruptive, that you're really not against them. I wonder what you and your friends could do. I'm just curious, you think?
Well, we would probably be quiet while they're talking.
Oh, okay.
One of the main things that teachers notice is if people are talking while they are. So we would be quiet while they're talking. We would not be on our phones. I know that there have been a couple times that I've looked at my phone and I realize that that's disruptive, but most of the time, keeping your phone, in your pocket or something is going to be a lot better. We would probably be taking notes as well, so we can have, the same information that they give us, but also like written down so that it's easier to break down and digest pretty much.
Yeah. This is such. I mean, so tell me about teachers that maybe you've had in the past who did a little bit of that, where they didn't think that you guys were against them, and instead they went slow. What can you think of some teachers that have done that for you before?
I can think of a few. Back in second grade, this is one of my favorite teachers ever. She didn't really bother boring us with things. I believe she taught us our English, I think, or some, gosh, I can't remember what subject she taught, but she kind of got straight into it. And even though we were second graders, she didn't treat us like kindergartners, I guess, she told us what to expect, and then we just got straight into it. And she was very nice to us. She never assumed that any of us wanted to cause trouble. She always gave us the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, wow. So what that mean to you back then as a student, to know you had a teacher who was always going to give you the benefit of the doubt? What did that mean to you think?
I mean, it felt really good. I felt like I was being heard, and I didn't feel like I was being blamed for maybe things that I didn't know were wrong.
Okay, just a really great kid. And answer a couple of questions here I see in the chat. Carol is saying, what have you done to unstuck a negative teacher? Oh, goodness. I think the first thing you have to do, Carol, is listen to them and not ask about problems. You just say, oh, this sounds really awful. How have you made it through so far? In spite of the fact that this student is not doing well. I think you also say, what have you tried so far to reach this student, to be able to teach in your class? What have you tried? What else have you tried? What else have you tried? And when they finally get to the point where they say, I've tried everything, then I might say, would you might like to try something a little different? It's a little bit different approach. And the way I like to do it is I'd like to maybe talk with you and the student together, because that's where it happens. That's where the magic happens. But I've got to get the teacher, again, to realize I'm listening to her or him. really important because your heart goes out to these poor teachers trying to make things work, and they do get negative sometimes when they feel they run out of ideas, mostly because they're not taught a lot of things in education courses on how to work with kids who are challenging. So once I get her to a point of just saying, well, okay, try something new, but I don't know if it's going to work or not. I don't know either, but we'll just try it. Then I have a very short conversation with student and teacher together. And we start off like I just shared with you. What are your best hopes, Ms. Smith? And what are your best hopes, John? And I do that. And if it gets a little bit too negative as we go through, I just continue to push them back onto solution focused path in the direction of what we're really trying to accomplish here. And that seems to make a difference. But I think it's listening to them first and acknowledging that things are tough for them, just like you would any other client. Let's see. She said, I think they're stuck on believing student needs to be punished. Absolutely. But see, that doesn't always work, does it? And so when I say, well, how well has it worked for you? Well, it hasn't. That's why I want you to fix it. And I can't really fix it, but I can sure have an idea on how we might begin to work something out if you're willing. And that's when I always schedule the meeting. 10-15 minutes. It doesn't take long. Okay, and let's see, we had somebody else here too. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Any other questions before we finish out? I'm going to tell you one more little story. And this is a very special story. I think you might appreciate this. There was a school counselor in a district that I'm working with. The district is actually becoming solution focused, which is amazing. And all the teachers and school counselors are being trained. A little girl, an elementary school girl, went up to her school counselor's office one day and said, Miss Johnson, I'm so tired of wearing this jacket. She showed that Miss Johnson her hands, and she had only a few fingers on one hand, and it was birth defect. And she said, the kids, I've never wanted them to really see me because it makes me feel so different. And then the counselor, instead of offering any kind of suggestion, said, so what can I do? What would be your best hopes for talking to me? And she said, I want you to talk to my class. And the counselor was really surprised. And she said, so what would you like me to tell them? She said, I want you to go and tell them that it's a birth defect, that I'm just like them, except for one hand. And I've got just a few fingers on the one hand, and it's not my fault. And that's all I want you to tell them. And the counselor said, well, do you want to go with me when I do that? And she said, no, I don't want to be in the room when you tell them. So the counselor went to the room and talked to the students in her room and told them exactly what the little girl had said. And afterwards, the little girl came in and the kids had some questions, and she answered the questions. And from that point on, the little girl took off her coat and didn't wear her coat anymore to school. And one day she was at home and getting ready to go to the grocery store with her mother. And she didn't have her jacket on. And the mother was used to seeing her wear her jacket all the time. And the little girl said, no, Mom, I don't need that anymore. You see, I'm just like them. I just have a fewer fingers on one hand than they do. So many stories I could share with you about when you just listen and let kids guide you. That was one of the sweetest stories I heard last year. And the counselor who did it did a marvelous job at just letting her guide him. And she said she would, he said he would see her so often after that in the playground, no coat on, just having a grand time. So any questions about anything we've talked about today? Or what do we do, if anything, that might have made a difference for you guys out there? Any comments or anything?
If I can I just wanted to thank you for sharing that, because it's really empowering to just, as a young person, to hear that. And it's so nice and validating, I guess, when young voices are heard, I guess, and really appreciated, and not just sort of tokenistic, they're really heard. So I just wanted to thank you for that, and for doing this workshop today. It's really been a great workshop, and I'm glad I stayed up till midnight.
Well, I am too. Well, I am too. Hopefully you can get some sleep. Okay. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and I love Yoda, and so I do free webinars every other week for my school counselor friends over in the US. We started doing that when the pandemic started, and I just had so much fun doing that. So at the end, I always do this: seek the voices of your students. You must, for then the solution force will be with you. And if you like the things we've talked about, here's a QR code. I do the free workshops every other week in the US, 12 noon. I guess in UK, that would be 6 p.m. Will, maybe that wouldn't be too bad. And then you might see some other, I have a lot of free resources on my website, and this will take you there. So thank you all so much for joining me this afternoon and at night, wherever you are. I hope you get some good rest after this. And again, it's always so much fun to meet other people that do what we do, right? Um, have a great conference. This is a lovely thing that our colleagues have put together for all of us. And may the force be with you. Thank you very much.